She was 7 months pregnant when she realized how quiet the world becomes when you have no one left to call. The room she stayed in was small, with one window that barely opened and walls that had seen better years. The heater didn't work well, and the cold crept in every night, even when she wrapped herself in 2 thin blankets. She slept on a narrow mattress placed directly on the floor, listening to the sound of traffic outside and the slow rhythm of her own breathing. Her name was Lena. She hadn't always lived like this. Once she had plans, a job she liked, and someone who promised to stand by her. But promises are easy to make when life is smooth. When things became hard, those promises disappeared quietly without apology. By the time she found out she was pregnant, the man who once said he loved her was already gone. Calls were unanswered. Messages were never read. Eventually, she stopped trying. Lena worked part-time at a small laundry shop. The pay was low, but the owner allowed her to sit when her back hurt and never complained when she needed a break. Some days were better than others. On good days, she felt hopeful. On bad days, she counted every coin and wondered how long she could keep going. That day was a bad day. She checked her wallet before leaving the laundry shop. Inside were a few worn bills and some loose change. When she counted it carefully, the total came to $7. That was all she had left until the end of the week. No savings. No help coming. Just $7. She placed a hand on her belly as she walked. The baby moved gently, as if reminding her that she wasn't alone, even if it felt that way most of the time. Lena whispered softly, promising the baby she would figure things out, even though she wasn't sure how. Her plan was simple. She would buy the cheapest food she could find. Maybe bread and soup, enough to last one day. Tomorrow, she would worry about tomorrow. The grocery store was only a few blocks away. The lights inside were bright, almost too bright for her tired eyes. She walked slowly through the aisles, checking prices again and again. Everything felt expensive. Even the simplest items seemed to cost more than she remembered. She picked up a small loaf of bread and then put it back. She reached for a can of soup and hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she did the math in her head. If she bought this, she wouldn't have enough for anything else. If she bought that, she might still be hungry later. That was when she noticed him. He was sitting on the floor near the store entrance, leaning against the wall. At first she thought he was sleeping, but as she got closer, she saw his face was pale, and his eyes were half open, unfocused. His clothes were worn and dirty, and his hands shook as if he was cold or in pain. People walked past him without slowing down. Some glanced at him briefly and looked away. Others didn't look at all. Lena stopped. Her first thought was that she couldn't help. She barely had enough for herself. Her second thought was that something was wrong. The man didn't look like someone asking for money. He looked like someone who might collapse at any moment. She stood there for a few seconds, unsure what to do. Her heart beat faster. She told herself she should keep walking. She told herself that she needed every dollar. She told herself that she was pregnant and had to think about her. Baby first, but her feet didn't move. She crouched slowly in front of him, keeping some distance. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. The man didn't answer right away. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. His eyes fluttered, and he tried to sit up, then failed. Lena felt fear rise in her chest. She looked around, hoping someone else would step in. No one did. "Do you need help?" she asked again, louder this time. The man finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Water," he said. "Please." That single word broke something inside her. Lena stood up and looked back at the items in her basket. Bread, soup, cheap food meant to get her through the night. She looked at her wallet again, even though she already knew what was inside. $7? She closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she saw herself later that night, sitting on the floor, hungry, wondering why she always made things harder for herself. She also saw the man on the ground, alone, ignored, possibly dying while people passed him by. She opened her eyes and made her choice. Lena walked quickly to the drink aisle and grabbed the largest bottle of water she could find. Then she went to the ready-food section and picked up a simple sandwich. Nothing fancy, just bread, meat, and cheese. She checked the price twice, her heart sinking as she realized it would take almost everything she had at the checkout. Her hands shook as she placed the items on the counter. She paid and received a few coins and change. That was it. Her wallet was almost empty now. She walked back outside and knelt beside the man again. She opened the bottle and held it carefully to his lips. Slowly, she said gently. He drank as if he hadn't had water in days. Some spilled onto his shirt, but he didn't seem to notice. When he finished, he let out a weak breath and closed his eyes for a moment. Lena handed him the sandwich. "Try to eat," she said. He took it with trembling hands and managed a few bites. His color improved slightly, and his breathing became more steady. "Thank you," he said, his voice still weak but clearer now. She nodded. "You're welcome." She wanted to ask his name, where he came from, why he was there. But something told her not to. Sometimes people carry stories too heavy to share with strangers. "Is there someone I can call for you?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, I just needed time." She understood that more than he knew. Lena helped him sit more comfortably against the wall and made sure he had the rest of the water. She stayed for a few minutes, watching to be sure he was okay. When he looked up at her again, his eyes filled with something close to tears. "I won't forget this," he said quietly. She gave a small smile. "Just take care of yourself." As she walked away, her steps felt heavier. The reality of what she had done settled in. She had no food for herself now, no money left for the night. Only the hope that somehow things would work out. She placed both hands on her belly again as she walked home. "We'll be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. Behind her, the man watched until she disappeared down the street. He pressed the bottle of water to his chest like it was something precious. In his tired mind, her face stayed clear, even as everything else felt foggy. Neither of them knew it then. But that small act, that last $7, had just quietly connected to lives in a way neither could imagine. And the world, for all its cruelty, had just been given a reason to turn. The days after that cold evening passed slowly. Lena felt the weight of her decision in every step. Her small apartment seemed colder than ever, and the $7 she had spent lingered in her mind like a heavy stone. She didn't regret helping the man outside the store, but the reality of her own hunger and growing belly was unavoidable. She counted every coin she had left, trying to make them last. Breadcrumbs became meals, and water from the tap was her only drink. At night, she wrapped herself tightly in her thin blankets and whispered to her unborn child, promising that soon things would get better, even if she had no proof of it. Meanwhile, somewhere not too far away, the man she had helped was waking in a hospital bed. He had been discovered by a security guard outside the store. They had called for an ambulance when he failed to answer questions properly. His injuries weren't life-threatening, but they were serious enough that he needed care. As he opened his eyes, he tried to remember the face of the woman who had given him water and food. The memory was blurry, like a dream that was fading too quickly. He felt a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt. How could someone with so little give so much? Lena did not know this. She continued her life quietly, going to work when she could and resting when she had to. Every day brought its own struggle. Sometimes she would sit by the window, staring at the people passing by outside, wondering about their lives. Most seemed hurried, focused only on themselves. Some glanced at her and her growing belly, and she felt a sharp sting of loneliness. She wanted someone to notice her, to care, but she had learned long ago that waiting for help was dangerous. The world didn't stop for anyone, especially not someone like her. One afternoon, while she was at the small laundry shop, her back aching from standing too long, a customer left a folded note in her hand. It simply said, "Stay strong. Better days are coming." Lena didn't know who had left it, and she didn't ask. She folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. For a moment, it felt like someone understood her, even if no one had spoken her name aloud. She smiled faintly, though her heart still felt heavy. Back at the hospital, the man was slowly recovering. The doctors didn't know much about him, only that he had no identification on him and couldn't fully explain where he had come from. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of safety. The hospital staff were kind but busy, and the silence of the room made him think about his life, about mistakes he had made, and about the small, unassuming woman who had shown him kindness. Her face stayed in his mind like a small, comforting light in the dark. Time moved forward, and Lena's pregnancy grew more difficult. Some nights she felt sharp pains that made her wince and gasp, afraid for the baby and herself. She couldn't afford doctors or proper medication. Instead, she relied on advice she had gathered from books and the internet, simple home remedies, and hope. Friends from her past no longer contacted her, and family had long disappeared from her life. She felt that the world had reduced her to a single struggle: survive today, hope for tomorrow. The man she had helped was slowly piecing his life together too. He received some calls from unknown numbers and had to answer carefully, wary of people who wanted to control him. He had left a life that was complicated, filled with power struggles and expectations he could not bear. Now, confined to a hospital bed, he began to understand how fragile life was, how unexpected moments of kindness could shake the foundation of someone's world. He tried to remember every detail of Lena's gesture, the way she had knelt down beside him, the care in her voice, the way she had given him something when she had almost nothing. Meanwhile, Lena continued her routine. She cooked small meals, washed clothes for neighbors, tried to sleep as much as possible during the day to save her strength for the nights. Sometimes she cried silently, not wanting anyone to hear, not wanting to seem weak. But some nights, when the moonlight hit her window just right, she felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just imagination. She didn't know. One evening, after returning from the shop, she noticed something unusual outside her building. A man was leaning against a wall, looking exhausted. For a moment, she thought it might be someone needing help again. She hesitated, feeling the memory of the last encounter. But then she shook her head and went inside. The world was harsh. She could not carry the weight of everyone's struggles, not anymore. She had enough trouble carrying her own. At the hospital, the man was beginning to ask questions. He wanted to know who had helped him, who had shown him that small human kindness when he had nothing to offer. The doctors and staff tried to answer, but no one knew. The memory of Lena remained only in his mind, like a painting that had been erased but left faint traces. He realized that someone had seen him as human, not as an object or a problem to be ignored. That thought haunted him in the best possible way. Days turned into weeks. Lena began noticing strangers in her neighborhood looking at her differently. Some smiled kindly, some avoided her. One day, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a few coins. The paper said, "Keep going. You are stronger than you know." Lena held it close to her heart. It reminded her of the woman she used to be. It's a part of her that still believed in the good in the world. The man's health improved steadily. He was still weak, but each day brought a little more strength. He walked the hospital corridors slowly, thinking about the woman who had given him water and food. He wondered if she knew the impact of her action, if she realized that $7, her last $7, had changed the course of his life. He felt an unusual responsibility to find her, though he did not know why exactly. There was a sense in his heart that their meeting had not been random, that some invisible thread had tied their lives together for a reason beyond understanding. Meanwhile, Lena continued her life quietly. She went to bed at night with an empty stomach more often than she would admit. She dreamed of a better life, a place where she and her baby could be safe and warm. Sometimes she thought about the man she had helped, wondering if he had made it through the night, if he was okay. She would never know, and she told herself that was fine. Some acts of kindness, she reminded herself, were meant to remain in the heart. It's not to be recognized or repaid. But the universe has a way of moving even when we do not see it. Small events, unnoticed by anyone, begin to gather like pieces of a puzzle. A kind word, a gentle hand, a coin spent when there is nothing left, all of these start shaping paths that no one can predict. For Lena and the man she helped, the puzzle was beginning to take shape, though neither of them realized it yet. One day, their lives would cross again in ways more powerful than either could imagine. But for now, they both lived in quiet, fragile moments, waiting for something they could not name. The man thought of her often, not in a romantic sense, but in the sense of awe and gratitude. He wondered how a woman who had nothing could give so much. How could someone struggling for herself still notice someone else in need? The memory of her kindness made him reconsider everything he had taken for granted, everything he had believed about the world. It made him see that true strength is not in power, wealth, or status, but in the small human acts of care we show when no one is watching. Lena never knew how close she had been to changing a life entirely. She didn't know that her small act of kindness had ripple effects that would stretch far beyond what she could see. Every day, she went on with her quiet, struggling life, unaware that somewhere, a man who had lost everything was slowly learning to live again because of her. And in that quiet, unassuming struggle, the story of hope, humanity, and connection was being written one small, invisible act at a time. Life was moving in ways Lena could not yet see. Every morning she woke up with the same worries, the same ache in her back, and the same questions about how she would survive the week. Yet there was a quiet rhythm to her days, moments of small beauty that no one noticed. A bird landing on the windowsill, the smell of bread from the corner bakery, the way the sun touched her belly in the morning light. These small things reminded her that the world was not entirely cruel. Meanwhile, the man she had helped, who had regained strength in the hospital, began to confront a reality he had long avoided. He was not an ordinary man, as Lena had imagined. His family, unknown to her, was among the wealthiest in the country, a name that carried influence, power, and secrecy. He had left that world behind years ago, tired of its expectations. Tired of people treating him like an object to be moved and controlled. But now, lying in a quiet hospital room, recovering from a moment of vulnerability that Lena had unknowingly saved, he realized he could not ignore it forever. There were responsibilities, decisions, and connections that could not be avoided. He started making phone calls, quietly, carefully, not to family yet, but to people he trusted outside the public eye. He spoke in hushed tones, asking questions about finances, about business, about people who had been loyal and those who had betrayed him. Even as he did this, his mind drifted to the woman who had helped him without hesitation. How had someone so small, so seemingly powerless, shown him kindness when he had nothing to offer? How had she acted when the world had turned its back on her? Back in her apartment, Lena felt the first real kick from her baby one evening. She gasped softly, placing her hands on her belly as the tiny movement pushed against her palm. Tears welled up, not from pain, but from a strange mixture of relief and joy. The baby inside her was alive and moving, a reminder that she was not alone in the struggle. Even though her own world was small and heavy with worry, there was life within her, as persistent and strong. The man, now walking slowly down the hospital corridor, had begun piecing together his next steps. He could not stay hidden forever. His family, powerful and secretive, would notice his absence. They would want answers, explanations, maybe even control. But there was a part of him that hesitated, a part that wanted to stay away, to keep the distance he had created over the years. And yet he could not stop thinking about Lena, her face, the way she had knelt beside him, the way her hands shook as she gave him the last money she had haunted him in ways that were hard to explain. Some nights, he closed his eyes and imagined walking through the streets, looking for her. He did not know where she lived, what she looked like in daylight, or how she survived each day. All he had was a memory, a moment, a kindness that had changed him. That memory became his quiet motivation. He wanted to see her again, not to repay her, not yet, but simply to witness the life of the person who had been so selfless. When the world had given her nothing, in her small apartment, Lena had begun to notice small changes in her neighborhood. Strangers smiled a little more, neighbors nodded with an unusual warmth, and sometimes small envelopes or coins appeared anonymously. She never knew who left them, and she never asked. She focused on surviving, on taking care of her baby, on moving through each day with quiet resilience. Yet there was a sense of unseen support, a feeling that the world might not be entirely against her. And perhaps she thought that was enough. At the hospital, the man's memory of her grew sharper. He remembered how her fingers had trembled as she handed him the bottle of water, how her eyes had searched his face for signs of pain, how she had stayed just long enough to make sure he was safe. That memory, small and quiet, became a turning point in his life. He began to realize that no matter how powerful his family was, no amount of wealth or influence could match the human connection he had experienced in that brief moment. He started to plan. Carefully, methodically, he wanted to find her. He reached out to friends who were discreet, asking for help in locating a young woman who had been seen helping a stranger outside a grocery store. There was no name, no address, only a memory and a small description. It was not easy. People laughed at him at first, thinking it was foolish to search for someone who had no known ties to him, but he persisted. Every day, the memory of her kindness pushed him forward. Lena, on the other hand, did not know that her life was about to intersect with his in ways that neither of them could have imagined. Her days were filled with small struggles finding enough food, keeping warm, taking care of herself and her growing baby. Some nights she would sit by the window looking at the street below and wonder if things would ever change. She had learned to live with uncertainty, to find courage in moments of despair, to take each day as it came, but she did not know that a life-changing connection was already forming, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about fate, chance, and human kindness. One afternoon, as she rested on her narrow mattress, she heard a soft knock on the door. Startled, she got up slowly, placing a hand on her belly. There was no one there when she opened it, only a small envelope lying on the floor. She picked it up carefully. Inside was a note that said, "Your kindness matters. Don't stop." No signature, no hint of who had left it. Lena smiled faintly, a small warmth spreading through her chest. The world had not forgotten her, she thought. Somewhere, someone noticed. The man across the city was receiving updates from his discreet contacts. Every lead brought him closer. Each story he heard, each bit of information gathered, built a map in his mind. He began to see a pattern of small, unnoticed acts of courage and kindness that seemed to thread through the lives of people he had never met. And at the center of that map, he felt, was the woman who had given him water and food when she had nothing. That small act, repeated only in memory, had sparked something larger, something invisible but powerful. It reminded him that even in a world filled with power, influence, and wealth, there was still room for human decency to change the course of life. Meanwhile, Lena's body grew heavier and her days became longer. She learned to walk slowly, to rest often, to conserve energy for what mattered most. The world outside continued to move fast. Unaware of her struggles, but she moved at her own pace, learning to find joy in small victories, a warm meal, a clean set of clothes, the tiny movements of her baby inside her, and yet there was always the lingering worry of what would come next. How she would survive the weeks ahead, how she would ensure the safety of the child. Growing within her, the man's determination grew stronger with each passing day. He could not explain why finding her felt so urgent, so necessary. It was not about money, not about gratitude alone. It was about something deeper. A recognition of humanity that had long been missing from his life. He started making plans for when he would finally see her again. He would not overwhelm her, not yet. He would approach carefully, quietly, with respect and understanding. And he would make sure that when their lives intersected again, it would be meaningful, undeniable, and life-changing. Lena continued her days, unaware that her last $7 had set into motion a series of events that would alter the paths of both their lives forever. She could not know that the man she had helped was part of a world filled with wealth, power, and secrets, a world she had never imagined and might never enter. She only knew survival, hope, and the quiet strength that came from caring for her unborn child. And that was enough to keep her moving forward. One difficult step at a time. At night, she would sometimes dream of a stranger, a man she could not fully see, someone who needed help. And she would kneel beside him, offering what little she had. She would wake with a start, her heart pounding, feeling both fear and comfort. Little did she know, those dreams were closer to reality than she could imagine. The connection she had made in a moment of quiet courage had already begun to bridge the distance between their lives. weaving invisible threads that fate would soon make visible. The man, now stronger, more aware, and more determined than ever, finally felt ready to take the next step. He would continue to gather information, but soon, very soon, he would find her. The woman whose last $7 had saved him, the woman whose kindness had reminded him of the good in the world, would become the center of a story neither of them could have imagined. And when that day came, the world would shift in ways that were quiet, yet powerful, gentle, yet undeniable, and both their lives would be forever changed. The days were growing warmer, and Lena's belly had grown round and heavy. Each movement felt like a small battle, and each night she slept lightly, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Her life had not changed in any obvious way. The bills were still overdue, the meals still small, and the nights still cold. But there was a quiet persistence in her heart that refused to let despair take over completely. She told herself every morning, one step at a time, one day at a time. And somehow that was enough. One afternoon, she went to a small clinic nearby for a routine checkup. The place was busy, filled with people who whispered in hallways, sat with worried expressions, or held the hands of loved ones. Lena waited quietly, trying not to make noise or call attention to herself. When the nurse called her in, she felt a familiar mix of relief and anxiety. Relief because she would be seen, cared for, and reassured. Anxiety because she worried about what she could not afford: medication, supplements, a better diet for the baby. Still, she smiled politely, answered questions, and did what she could. Meanwhile, across town, the man she had helped was moving cautiously back into the world he had left behind. He had begun speaking with trusted friends and associates, not as the powerful figure he once was, but as someone who had seen his life reduced to a fragile moment. That fragility had changed him. The encounter with Lena haunted him, and he could not let it go. Every phone call he made, every question he asked about the world, every plan he considered for his return to his family's affairs had her in the back of his mind. She had saved him when he had nothing, and that simple act had become his anchor at the clinic. Lena was filling out forms when she noticed a man standing near the entrance. He wore a suit, but it was simple and understated, nothing flashy. He seemed out of place, yet calm, scanning the room with quiet attention. Something about him made her pause. She tried to focus on the forms and the questions she needed to answer, but her eyes kept returning to him. For a moment, she felt a strange familiarity, a feeling she could not name. The man noticed her as well. Not in a way that was obvious or intrusive, but there was recognition in his eyes, a spark of memory that he could not ignore. He had spent months piecing together information, quietly searching for her. And now, here she was, sitting in a crowded clinic. Unaware of who he really was, unaware that her small act of kindness had changed everything in his life. He wanted to speak to her, to confirm that it was her, but he hesitated. How could he approach her without frightening her? How could he explain the connection, the importance of the moment they had shared? Lena's name was called, and she rose slowly, her hands on her belly as she walked toward the examination room. The man followed quietly, keeping a careful distance. He watched her as she moved, noticing the strength in her steps, the determination in the way she carried herself despite her struggles. He felt an overwhelming sense of respect and admiration, combined with a quiet hope that she was safe, that she was managing to survive despite the challenges she faced. The nurse guided Lena into the room, and the man stayed just outside the door, observing. He saw her interact with the staff, answering questions politely, following instructions, and taking care of herself with quiet attention. It struck him how remarkable she was, how much courage she carried in such a small frame. He remembered the night she had given him her last money, the way her hands had trembled, and he realized that courage like that could not be taught or bought, was born from a heart that refused to ignore the suffering of others. After her checkup, Lena stepped out, feeling exhausted but relieved. She clutched the small bag of items the nurse had given her and walked slowly toward the exit. As she reached the doors, the man approached, careful to remain calm and non-threatening. He spoke softly. "Excuse me. I think I know you." Lena froze. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she felt panic. Who was this man? Why did he seem familiar? She studied his face, trying to place him, searching her memory for a clue. But nothing came immediately. Her life had been so full of struggles and people she could not trust that she did not know whether to feel relief or fear. "It's me," the man said gently, his eyes steady on hers. "I don't know if you remember, but you helped me months ago. When I was outside the store, and you gave me water and food. You didn't know me, but you helped me anyway." Lena's mind raced. She remembered that night, the fear, the cold, the way she had given him her last money. She thought about how little it had seemed at the time, how small her act had felt. And now, here he was, standing in front of her, alive, healthy, and strangely grateful. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I had nothing. I thought you needed it more than me," he smiled softly, shaking his head. "It mattered. More than you realize. That night changed a lot for me. I needed someone to care, and you did." Lena felt a warmth rise in her chest, mixed with disbelief. She had never imagined that such a small gesture could mean so much. Her life had been full of struggle, of moments when she thought no one would ever notice, and now, someone was telling her that her kindness had made a difference. The man continued, "I've been trying to find you ever since. I wanted to make sure you were safe, that you were okay. I wanted to help you if you would let me." Lena looked down, her hands clasped over her belly. She had never asked for help. She had learned to survive on her own, to rely on her own strength. And yet, here was someone offering more than words, offering care and support. She felt a mixture of hope, fear, and gratitude all at once. "I don't know what to say," she repeated softly. "I'm just trying to get through each day." He nodded, understanding. "I know. And I don't want to take that away from you. I wanted you to know that your kindness did not go unnoticed. You saved me, not just that night, but in ways I didn't understand until later." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She had been carrying so much weight, so much worry, so much fear. And now, someone she barely knew was acknowledging her, seeing her, recognizing her courage and strength. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt truly seen. They stood there for a long moment. Two strangers connected by a simple act of humanity. The weight of months of struggle and survival pressing quietly around them. Outside the clinic, the city moved on, unaware of the meeting that was unfolding. Unaware that two lives so different, yet now intertwined, were beginning to change forever. The man spoke again. Softly, "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say thank you, and if you ever need help, I want to be there for you." Lena nodded slowly, still processing, still unsure of what to feel. But deep down, she knew that this was a turning point. Something had shifted. Something had changed the path of her life. She had acted out of kindness when she had nothing. And now that act had brought someone back into her world, someone who could offer support, someone who could help her survive the challenges ahead. As they parted that day, neither of them knew exactly what the future would hold. But both understood that a small act of generosity, a moment of compassion, had created a bond that could not be easily broken. And in that quiet understanding, both felt a sense of hope, a sense that, even in the darkest times, human connection could bring light, change, and the possibility of a better tomorrow. For Lena, the days ahead would still be difficult. She still had to care for her growing child, manage her work, and face the uncertainty of life. But now, there was a sense of possibility, a sense that the world was not entirely cruel, that kindness could be repaid, and that even the smallest gesture could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. And for the man, the memory of her courage and generosity would guide his actions, reminding him that true strength comes not from wealth, power, or influence, but from the willingness to care, to act, and to recognize the humanity in others. Even when it is inconvenient or difficult, The months after that quiet meeting at the clinic passed slowly. But they passed with a sense of purpose Lena had not felt in a long time. Her belly grew rounder, the baby moving often enough to remind her of life and hope. She still struggled. The bills were never ending, the nights sometimes cold, and the food often scarce. But now she carried a quiet confidence that things were changing. The world was noticing her in ways she hadn't expected. She thought often about the man who had approached her, the one who had remembered her kindness when no one else had. She did not yet know the full story of his life, but she felt that somehow her life was no longer entirely her own. Somehow, it had become intertwined with someone whose world was far beyond hers, yet who valued her just as she was. The man, on his part, had begun to step more fully into his old life, though with a new perspective. His family, powerful and wealthy, had noticed his absence, of course. He was no longer returning to them as the frightened, lost person he had once been. He returned cautiously, quietly, making choices carefully. While thinking constantly of Lena, she had shown him a kind of courage he had never seen in his own family. A selfless, quiet bravery that had nothing to do with power or money. He wanted to protect that courage, not diminish it, not overwhelm it with his wealth or influence. He wanted her to thrive on her own terms, and yet he wanted to ensure she would never go hungry, never be cold, never feel alone again. One morning, Lena woke to a soft knock on her door. She rubbed her eyes and went to open it, half expecting another delivery or an envelope slipped under her door. But this time, it was him. He stood there, dressed simply, nothing flashy, holding a small package of fresh food and some vitamins for her and the baby. His presence was calm, his eyes steady and kind. "I thought you might need these," he said softly. "No pressure, just take them if you want." Lena felt her throat tighten. She had never accepted help so directly, never allowed herself to rely on someone else. Yet there was something in his voice, something in his steady gaze, that made it impossible to say no. She accepted the package with a small nod, words failing her. He smiled faintly, understanding, and left quietly, giving her space, giving her respect. That was the first of many small gestures, careful, kind, thoughtful, never overwhelming. Always giving her room to breathe. Weeks passed. Lena gave birth in a small clinic, with only a few people around her. It was difficult, exhausting, and sometimes frightening. But she was strong. Her child cried, healthy and loud, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel relief, joy, and pride. The man learned of the birth almost immediately. He visited quietly, bringing supplies, helping with paperwork, offering guidance in small, respectful ways. He never tried to control her, never insisted, never assumed she owed him anything. He only offered support, a steady presence, a reminder that the world could still be gentle. As the baby grew, so did Lena's confidence. With his quiet assistance, she was able to move into a slightly better apartment, one that was safe, warm, and bright. She found part-time work again, enough to contribute, enough to feel independent. She never forgot the nights when food was scarce and the streets were cruel, but those memories became fuel rather than chains. They reminded her how far she had come, how resilient she was, how a single act of kindness could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined. The man, too, began to understand the depth of that ripple. In helping Lena, in making sure she was safe, fed, and strong, he felt his own life transform. He no longer measured himself by the wealth or power he had inherited, but by the ways he could use it to honor the humanity he had almost lost sight of. He began engaging with his family differently, choosing patience over pressure, listening instead of commanding, understanding instead of judging. Lena's influence, though indirect, had shifted the course of his life as profoundly as he had changed hers.